everyone, it's Lisa from I Dream in Soap. Welcome to my channel and thanks for dropping by. This soap is a soap that I made for the January 2020 Soap Challenge Club. Now, it's not actually an entry for the Soap Challenge, and that's because there's been some changes this year with the Soap Challenge Club. Amy's established some extra help and support for members of the club, and that includes the creation of a bubble support team. Now, I'm a member of the bubble support team, and what that means is that there's a few of us who will be there to help and advise members about the challenges, answer questions, and also to make the soaps ahead of time and give advice and tell people about our experiences, the pitfalls, things that work and things don't, and just generally be there to support and help answer questions throughout the month. So if you've ever wanted to join the Soap Challenge Club but have been a bit nervous that maybe you'll be a little bit out of your depth, 2021 could be the perfect year for you because of this extra support that's available. As normal, there were two categories for this month's soap challenge, and the soap I'm going to do here is for a salt crystal soap. The other category was to make a geode soap. Now you can see here I've just marked out the bottom of my little slab mould where I know my bars are going to be. Now obviously I'm quite lucky, I've got a clear slab mould here. I've just put some tape on the bottom so I don't actually mark the mould, but you could certainly do this on the bottom of a normal slab mould. Just do the pen marks underneath the tape and put them on the bottom of your slab mould if you wanted to mark it. I've got two types of salt because I'm actually going to use a salt bar with my salt soap that I'm doing. And what I've done is I've weighed out the total amount of salt that I would use in this recipe, and I've divided it between the amount of salt in these larger crystals and the finer salt to actually put in my salt bar. Now, in my calculations, I have taken account of the fact that when we unmould these salt bars, we are going to lose some of this salt that I'm just putting in here. So all you want to do at this stage is to drop in this large crystalled salt. Now, what's a good idea to do is to mound this salt up quite a bit, because one of the great effects of these salt crystal soaps is that you want to have sort of the cavities and things in the soaps, and this will happen when some of this salt falls out and shapes your final soap. In addition, I'm going to do some in individual cavity moulds as well. And you can see here I've just placed this on a chopping board just so that my cavity mould isn't all floppy when I try and pick it up. But it's exactly the same principle. I'm just popping in some mounds of salt into these cavity moulds, and again piling them up quite deeply so that some of that will fall out and leave those lovely cavities. So I'm just finishing off dividing out the rest of this salt. Now obviously if you're doing this you probably don't need to be as particular with the amount of salt that you're using, but remember I'm in the UK, so all of my bars are assessed, so therefore I have to use the correct amount of salt according to the recipe that I have assessed. And once I've got all my salt in, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time arranging my salty piles into aesthetically pleasing salty pile shapes so they give a nice effect in the finished soap. And then it's just simply a case of making up the rest of your soap batter. Now obviously for the challenge you could do any type of cold processed soap you like. I just chose to do a salt bar in these salty soaps, but that wouldn't have been necessary. Normal cold process would have been absolutely fine. So I've got my oils and my lye solution for both my little slab mould and my individual cavity moulds. And I'm just going to make my bars as normal. So mixing those two together. And then I'll give them a blend just to an emulsion or a very light trace. Now, if you're interested in more details about exactly how I make my salt bars as a salt bar tutorial, I do have a video for that, so I'll leave that as a link in the description below. I'm using a lavender essential oil in these bars. Now, lavender essential oil as well as peppermint essential oil I find do not accelerate your trace, so you're pretty safe to put these in and mix them into your batter fairly early on. I'm going to divide this soap into 2 portions because I want to have a slight swirl going through these to give a sort of rock type effect, because a rock wouldn't just be one solid single colour. So I've weighed my jug with my soap batter in. I know how much my jug weighs, so I take that away and I can then pour out the bit that I want to split off. Now, of course, you could just roughly pour out the amount that you wanted. That would be absolutely fine. I'm keeping these bars natural, so I'm just using some activated charcoal to colour the bigger portion of my soap, and I've pre-dispersed this in some oil taken from the batch soap oils. Now, I don't want this to be a really black soap. I want it to be sort of a grey, stony looking soap. So I'm just putting a little bit of my activated charcoal in at the moment. And that's fine for me with this assessment. In this assessment, we have a usage rate of up to a certain amount of things that can go into it, like our charcoals and our clays. So it's absolutely fine for me not to put all of the activated charcoal in. And then I'm just going to divide out the salt accurately between the 2 portions. Now, it would have actually been a little bit more straightforward to have popped the salt into the whole batch. But remember, as soon as you put your salt in, it will accelerate your trace, and it would have made it a lot harder to get that activated charcoal mixed in really nicely throughout the batter. So I mixed the activated charcoal in so I could get that blended in really well, and then I'm doing the salt next. To use an in the pot swirl so I get the sort of design that I want in my sort of rocky, craggy salt soap. Now, I'm not putting all of my soap in and pouring everything in one big in the pot swirl. And this is because this salt makes the batter really quite thick, so it's very difficult to get it to drop all the way through to the bottom, and you could end up with big solid lumps of colour. So I'm just doing a little bit of a time, and that allows me to get a nice mix going on. A final bit of sorting out of those little salt piles so they're all sticking up nicely. And then as I start the pour, I want to make sure that I don't flatten out these salt piles. So I'm going to pour in between the piles of salt, and that will then, if anything, help push them together and keep them to the shape that I want. I'm going to do exactly the same for these cavity moulds, and then I'm just going to carry on adding bits of each batter to my pot and gradually pouring them in and completing the pours. Now, one of the things to bear in mind with this technique is the thickness of your trace. This is one of those techniques where it's better to have a trace that isn't too thin. So as you can see here, mine's getting pretty thick. It's definitely sort of a medium trace, if not getting onto a thick trace. And that's because of the nature of the salt bar recipe that we've got. We know they accelerate trace a little bit. Now, the reason you want a thicker trace is because you don't want your soap batter to sink through all of those salt crystals. Because if it does that, it will just literally bind them all into a big salty salt crystal block, and we don't want that. We want some of the crystals, the ones on the top, to stick to the soap batter, and then we want the others to fall out and leave some of those lovely cavities. And that will only happen if you haven't stuck them all together with soap batter. Now, once I've got everything poured down, I obviously want to level off these surfaces. Remember, this is a fairly thick batter, so it's not going to flow in nice and level. And I don't want to end up planing these bars. These are salt bars, so I'm just going to get them as level as I possibly can. Now, one thing, again, just to be aware of for this technique is be careful when you're tapping your moulds down. The harder you tap your moulds, the more of that batter is going to seep between all those salt crystals. And remember what we discussed earlier, you don't want to stick that whole lump of salt crystals together, you just want the base ones to be stuck to the soap so the others can fall out. Okay, so gentle with that tapping down. And then, as I said, because mine is thick and it's a salt bar, I'm just going to sort of level it out a bit with a palette knife the best I can. And that's pretty well it. It's a fairly straightforward pour. I am going to cover these and seapot them as normal. Now for mine, because they're salt bars, I'll need to make sure that for the slab, I unmould and cut them within a couple of hours. The individual cavity moulds, I can leave them in there, that's fine, and unmould them later on whenever I'm ready. If you're doing this with a normal cold process recipe, then you would obviously need these to saponify and probably be ready in about 24 hours before you can cut them. So here is my little slab mould unmoulded just a couple of hours later, and can you see as I lift it up and take that base off my slab mould, I'm going to lose quite a lot of that salt. And remember, we were planning for that and I accounted for that in my calculation. And that's what gives these lovely sort of almost geode sort of effects in this salt bar. And then I've just cleared up all that loose straggly salt and I've turned these over so I can cut from the non-salty side down so I don't get too many drag marks. And I'm just going to chop them into the 6 bars that I want. Now there's no need to waste that loose salt. You can always just scrape it back up again and put it in your salt pot and use it in some more soaps, or even grind it up to use it in a sort of traditional salt bar. I probably wouldn't collect it up to sprinkle it on my dinner or anything. That's probably not the best idea. So I'm just going to get those bars chopped up, and you can see that I've got some nice corners where I've got that sort of crater effect going on, and I will go round them and flick out any of those loose bits of salt so I don't have bits of salt dropping out all of the time. And then as a finishing touch, I'm just going to scrape some sort of little cracks in the top of the soap to make them look like they're rocks that have got some cracks, and the cracks are coming from the salty crags. Now again, because mine are salt bars, I'm having to do this quite early on. This is still sort of just under about 3 hours from when I poured these. If you were doing just normal cold processed soap, this would just be fine on your soaps once you've unmoulded them after 24 hours or so. I then unmoulded my individual cavity moulds. I did these after about, I guess, 3-4 hours sort of thing, but they would have been safe to leave in the mould a little bit longer, and they wouldn't have got too hard to engrave the tops on them. And it was then just a case of doing the same thing, engraving some nice cracks all over the soap and down the sides as well to carry on that pattern. Now you could leave those cracks exactly how they are, or you could highlight them with some mica painting. Now because again my salt baths are being natural, I've literally just got some red clay here and I'm using that instead of mica, but in exactly the same way. I've just mixed it in with a little bit of oil. And I found the easiest way to do the painting was, rather than trying to get this precisely in the little cracks, I actually found it easier to plop quite a lot of it over the cracks so it really went in nicely, and then just wipe the excess off afterwards. That's just what I found worked better for me. So I wiped off the bulk of the excess first of all with one cloth, and as you can see here, that cloth got quite dirty and saturated, but it all just comes out in the wash. And once I've got that main bit off, I then swapped to a clean cloth and got them finished off. And then that is pretty well it. So here are the final pictures of the soaps, the ones made in the slab moulds and then the cavity moulds. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you like the soap. If you have, it would be great if you gave me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see what I'm making in the future, why not subscribe to my channel? And if you've got any questions or comments, then please leave them in the comments section below and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching everyone. Happy soaping!